Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another Power Rankings video, week 19 of the Power Rankings series that sees a little bit of shiftments. We see some new honorable mentions, and for the first time in a long time, not Tampa or Colorado are first in the Power Rankings. We'll touch on all the Power Rankings coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we begin this video, do not forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to hit 650 by Friday's trade deadline, so if you can, leave a subscribe. It really does help with the channel. On top of that, don't forget to stay tuned for videos come out in the very near future. If you haven't already, check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. I'll have a link to it down in the description below if you can, and it's within your means. Leave a donation, it really does help with the channel. And also don't forget to stay tuned for Friday's live stream at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Time, talking about all the news and rumors that happen on trade deadline day, so definitely don't forget to stay tuned for that. But in today's video, we've got another Power Rankings video. So this is week 19. We got back into the Power Rankings swing of things last week, and now the season's restarted after the Olympic break. We've got a little bit of shiftments in the Power Rankings going on for this week. So we're going to start off as we usually do, 3 honorable mentions, then the 10 teams in the Power Rankings, and we'll see where I have placed everyone after we got back from the Olympics. So to start off with, we've got the 3rd honorable mention. Now staying in the honorable mention category, we're moving a couple of spots down in the honorable mentions, is the Seattle Kraken. They didn't have a great week. They went 1-2-0. They were able to get a win over the Vancouver Canucks in impressive fashion, but then again, most teams are being the Vancouver Canucks in impressive fashion right now. They also lost badly to both the Dallas Stars and the St. Louis Blues. So I was contemplating kicking them entirely out of the rankings, but because there weren't a whole bunch of other teams who I saw fit to go into the Power Rankings, when keep them as the last honorable mention spot. Still a decent team. If they have a good week, they could go a little bit higher, but after what I saw last week, I think they definitely deserve to be bumped down to the 3rd honorable mention spot. Offensively, team's still pretty good with Eberle and with Tolvanen. Defensively, not looking too shabby with a guy like Adam Larsson, and in net, Decor and Grubauer are still a really good tandem, but they just didn't have a couple of really good games this week, and that's why I'm bumping the Kraken down to the 3rd honorable mention, even though they are still in a playoff spot. The 2nd honorable mention this week, and a team who's actually been heating up over the past couple of weeks, and I think it's the right time to put them back into the honorable mentions, is the Ottawa Senators. They had a pretty decent week last week. They went 1-0-1. They lost to a Red Wings team that's above them in the standings, 2-1 in overtime, so they at least got a point against a really good Red Wings team, and then they were able to take care of business, beating the Toronto Maple Leafs 5-2. So it was really going over the Maple Leafs. They got at least a point out of Detroit, got 3 out possible, 4 points, and now only 5 points back of the Boston Bruins for the last wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference. So all in all, really solid stuff there from the Ottawa Senators since coming back from the Olympic break, and actually into the Olympic break, they're actually doing pretty good as well. So because of all of that, the record over the last 10 games, I'm going to put them into the honorable mentions here. Not good enough to go in the top 10, but I feel like they've done enough, in my opinion, to be put in the honorable mentions. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Stützle and Cozens. Defensively, not looking too bad with a guy like Thomas Chabot, and in net, Allmark hasn't been great, but he hasn't been terrible either, so very interesting note there. But I'm going to put the Senators as the 2nd honorable mention. And the 1st honorable mention this week is a team who went 2-0 last week, one of the few Pacific Division teams who had a winning record last week and have gotten themselves within striking distance of a postseason berth, and that is the San Jose Sharks. The Sharks had a pretty decent week, going 2-1-0. They started out the week extending their losing streak that began before the Olympic break by losing to the Calgary Flames. It was a very bad loss, but they bounced back in a very impressive fashion, first taking down the Edmonton Oilers, who were hurting themselves 5-4, and then they were able to overcome an early deficit to take down the Winnipeg Jets 2-1 in overtime. So far, a possible 6 points to a possible 3 wins. Nothing to scoff at. That has gotten themselves, I think, 3 or 4 points out of playoff spot right now. So really good stuff there from the Sharks. They're still back in contention for a playoff spot. Not sure if they'll get it, but I liked what they did this week. Being Edmonton, being Winnipeg, nothing to scoff at, and I definitely think they deserve to be put into the honorable mentions. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Misa and Celebrini. Defensively, not looking too shabby with a guy like Ferraro, and in net, Askarow's been pretty decent for the San Jose Sharks. So all in all, solid stuff there from San Jose, but I saw enough this week to put them into the honorable mentions. So those are the 3 honorable mentions. But now going over to the top 10 teams I have in my power ranking. So the 10th spot is a team who was actually in the honorable mentions last week when we did the power rankings, but I bumped them up to the 10th spot after having a pretty solid week coming out of the Olympic break, and that is the now 31-15-13 14, Pittsburgh Penguins. Had a really good week, going 2-1 last week, so I felt like it was time to put them back into the power rankings. They had a really solid week, started out the week with a very good win over the New Jersey Devils, followed that up with a blown lead and a shootout loss to the New York Rangers, which wasn't overly great, but followed that up with a very impressive 5-0 victory over the Vegas Golden Knights. So all in all, really still out there from the Penguins. They're still a top 3 team in the Metro Division, still going toe-to-toe with the Islanders for that second spot in the Metro, so I think it's right to put them back into the top 10 of the power rankings, and I think after going 2-1 and getting 5 possible 6 points, they're looking more and more like they're probably going to be a playoff team this year. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Penguins, but that's why I'm bumping them back into the power rankings. Offensively, the team's looking pretty good with Malkin, with Chinikov, with Russ. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Shea and newly acquired Gerard. And in net, Seelovs has been brilliant for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Penguins, but after what was a really solid week, to go back into the top 10 of the power rankings. Next at the number 9th spot is the team who was actually 10th spot in the power rankings last week, but I bumped them up 1 spot because they were actually undefeated, and that is the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks last week went 3-0-0. They're now on a 5-game winning streak, and they're up to a 33-23-3 record, and as of Monday, they were, points percentage-wise, top spot in the Pacific Division, and they're the only Pacific Division team who, if you combined regulation losses and overtime and shootout losses together, would not be below 500 in the Pacific Division. So all in all, Ducks are looking great. They took down the Edmonton Oilers in come-from-behind fashion. They took down the Winnipeg Jets in come-from-behind fashion, and they took down the Calgary Flames in come-from-behind fashion. 3 really impressive wins against West Canadian teams to begin their post-Olympic stretch. So very interesting note there. The Ducks are, in my opinion, the best Pacific Division team. Because of that, I'm bumping them up to the 9th spot in the power rankings. Offensively, the team's looking good with Gauthier, with Carlson, with Kreider. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Trouba and Mintyukov, and in net, Dossel continues to be an elite goaltender for that Ducks team. So all in all, solid stuff there from Anaheim, but they get bumped up to the 9th spot in the power rankings. At the 8th spot in the power rankings, after getting 3 out possible 4 points this week, and still being a top-end team in the Atlantic Division, we have the Montreal Canadiens. They wound up going 1-0-1 coming out of the Olympic break to put up their record to a 33-17-9 record. So not too bad there. That was, I think, our points percentage-wise 2nd in the Atlantic, and points-wise 3rd in the Atlantic. It's very, very crowded in that Atlantic Division, but still, they got 3 out possible 4 points, which wasn't half bad. They had a very narrow overtime loss to what was apparently a red-hot New York Islanders team, and followed that up with an impressive 6-2 thrashing of the Washington Capitals. So they had a very impressive win, a narrow overtime loss, got 3 out possible 4 points, kept relatively good pace in the Atlantic Division. So all in all, because of that, there were a couple of teams who were a little bit better than them, which is why I am bumping them down a couple of spots from last week. But still, this team is one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, a really solid team in the Atlantic Division, and that's why they are 8th in the power rankings. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Caulfield, Suzuki, Doc. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Matheson and Hudson, and in net, they've been all right, but Montembeault and Dobish have done enough. So very interesting note there, but the Habs are 8th in the power rankings. 7th in the power rankings, bumping up 1 spot from last week, is the New York Islanders. Just like the Anaheim Ducks, they were undefeated and went 3-0-0 last week to bump up their record to 35-21-3. Because of that record, they are now tied with the Pittsburgh Penguins for 2nd spot in the Metro Division, and they are looking fantastic. They started out the week with a win over the Montreal Canadiens, like we just talked about, in overtime. Then they took down the Blue Jackets in what was a very huge playoff implication game 4-3, also in overtime. And then they had a late winner to take down the Florida Panthers back over on Sunday, 5-4. So all in all, 3 very narrow but very impressive victories from the Islanders. But more impressive than the fact that they went 3-0 coming out of the Olympic break and are, I think, also on a 5-game winning streak is the fact that Matthew Schaefer wound up in the game against the Montreal Canadiens, becoming the highest scoring 18-year-old defenseman in NHL history, hitting the 18-goal mark, and then on Sunday became one of only 4 rookie defensemen in the entire history of the NHL to have a 20-goal rookie season, which is absolutely fantastic. Leach is the all-time rookie defenseman goal-scoring leader with 23 goals. Schaefer has 22 games or 21 games or something like that to get 3 goals. Schaefer is very likely to break that record. So very interesting note there. Schaefer has been an incredible story since the Islanders are going into the trade deadline as buyers. And I think that all adds up to me bumping them back up to 7th spot in the power rankings. I think it's deserved the way that they've been playing recently. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Lee, with Barzal, with Pajot. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Schaefer and Pelech. And in net, Sorokin still being Sorokin. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Islanders as they get bumped up to 7th spot in the power rankings. At 6th spot in the power rankings, they've fallen down quite a bit from where we had them in last week's power rankings, is the Minnesota Wild. They went 1-2-0 this week to drop down to a 35-16-10 record. So it wasn't really good for the Minnesota Wild last week. They started the week really well by taking down the Colorado Avalanche 5-2, but they finished off the week poorly by losing to the Utah Mammoth, and then in an narrow fashion gave up a late game leader to lose to the St. Louis Blues. So all in all, it wasn't great stuff there against St. Louis and Utah, but still, they are one of the best teams in the NHL, one of the few teams who have hit over 80 points. Yeah, you don't want to lose to Utah and St. Louis, but they also beat Colorado, which is a very impressive feat. So all in all, I do want them down from 2nd spot last week, but not too far, because they're still one of the best teams in the entire NHL. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with guys like Eriksson, Kaprizov, and Boldy. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Faber and Hughes, and in net, Gustafsson continues to be a really stellar goaltender for them. So on all, solid stuff there from Minnesota, but they get bumped down to 6th spot in the power rankings, bumping up 1 spot from last week, and now at the 5th spot in the power rankings is the Dallas Stars. They wound up going 2-0 last week and were also undefeated. They started the week with a takedown of the Seattle Kraken, and then in narrow come from behind fashion, took down the Nashville Predators 3-2 in overtime. So for all possible 4 points, not too bad there. They're up to a 36-14-9 record and the 2nd best team in that Western Conference. So all in all, really solid stuff there from the Dallas Stars, who are still one of the best teams in the entire NHL, and I think bumping them up to 5th spot is deserved. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Johnston, Rantanen, Duchesne. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Heiskanen and Lindell, and in net, Jake Onger has been great for the Dallas Stars. So all in all, solid stuff there from the Stars, but they are now 5th in the power rankings, falling down from the 1st spot in the power rankings last week. At the 4th spot now in the power rankings is the Tampa Bay Lightning. For the first time in a while, they are not the number 1 team in the power rankings. They're down to a 38-16-4 record after going 1-2-0 last week. If they had a couple of really close games, I probably would have kept them in the top 3. They started the week really well with a win over the Toronto Maple Leafs, but then they lost to Carolina Hurricanes in narrow fashion 5-4. That wasn't a terrible loss. The Kings are a really good team, but then they lost 6-2 to the Buffalo Sabres. Vasilevsky got chased. It was just a terrible game. Now this might be a one-off, and I might put them back into the top spot in the power rankings next week, but after that Buffalo loss, I could not keep them at the top spot anymore, so they get bumped down to the 4th spot in the power rankings, but still they are the 2nd best team in the entire Eastern Conference, one of the only teams to have 80 points in the entire NHL, and they still have a good cushion for the top spot in the Atlantic Division. So I do bump them down from 1st spot last week, but they're still a pretty good team, and I only bump them down to 4th spot. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with Gensel, with Goncalves, with Kucherov. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Hedman and Moser, and in net, Vasilevsky, even though he got pulled, was still pretty good. So all in all, solid stuff there from Tampa, but after being 1st for the last couple of weeks, they fall to 4th. A 3rd spot in our power rankings this week, and bumping up 1 spot from last week, is the Colorado Avalanche. They had a pretty solid week, going 2-0 and improving to 39-10-2, extending their lead for the entire NHL to 5 points. So very interesting note there. They wound up taking down the Utah Mammoth. Then we talked about they lost to Minnesota before they finished the week with a win over the Chicago Blackhawks. So it wasn't a bad week there from the Avs, getting 4 out possible 6 points, 2 out possible 3 wins, keeping ahead of Dallas, Minnesota in that very tight Central Division race. And they are still the best team in the NHL points-wise. So because of all that, I am going to put them back up to top 3 in the power rankings. Offensively, team's looking pretty good with McKinnon, with Nichushkin, with Lehkonen. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Makar and newly acquired Kulak. And in net, Wedgwood continues to be a really solid goaltender for the Avs. So after going 2-1-0 this week, the Avs are bumped up to 3rd spot in the power rankings. Another team who bumps up 1 spot from last week and is now at 2nd spot in the power rankings is the Carolina Hurricanes. They had a pretty solid week. They went 2-0-0 to improve to a 38-15-6 record and are now in sole possession of the 1st spot in the entire Eastern Conference. So because of all of that, I do think bumping up Carolina is the right move. They beat the Tampa Bay Lightning, who at the point were the best team in the Eastern Conference, and they took down the Detroit Red Wings in pretty impressive fashion, 5-2. So two of the best teams in the Atlantic Division, the Carolina Hurricanes toppled. They are by far the best Metro Division team right now, and because of all of that, I think moving them up to the second spot in the power rankings is deserved. Offensively, teams looking pretty good with Svechnikov, Aho, and Jarvis. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Slavin and Gostisbehere in net. Bussi continues to be a really solid goaltender for the Hurricanes. So after going undefeated last week and now the top team in the Eastern Conference, I'm bumping the Carolina Hurricanes up to number 2. And now the new number 1 team, which I would never have suspected at the beginning of the season, and the first time since week 9 we don't have a Tampa or a Colorado the first spot in the power rankings. We have the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres, just like the Islanders and the Ducks, went 3-0 last week to be undefeated. They were brilliant. They started out the week with a narrow win over the New Jersey Devils. Then they were able to narrowly take down the Florida Panthers, a Panthers team who was desperate for a win. And then like we talked about, they completely and utterly embarrassed the Tampa Bay Lightning. It was 4-0 within the first period, and they chased Vasilevsky. That performance alone got me thinking to put them in the not only top 5, maybe the top 3, but then a couple of games earlier in the week. Yeah, I think at this point in time, with the run that they've been on since early December, Buffalo deserves to be the top team in the power rankings right now with how hot they've been. Once again, a couple of things happened this week. They could get bumped out first spot, but for this week, after the impressive showing against Tampa, Buffalo is going to be top spot in the power rankings. Offensively, teams looking great with Tage Thompson, Jack Quinn, and Josh Jones. Defensively, not looking too shabby with guys like Dahlin and Byram. And in net, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Alex Leon have both been great. So all in all, really solid stuff there, but after a very impressive win on Saturday against Tampa, Buffalo is your new number 1 team in the power rankings. So definitely, those are my power rankings for this week. Just to recap, guys who I took out of the power rankings and guys who I put in. Columbus, who was 9th spot in the power rankings last week, did not get a win this week, so I bumped them out of the top 10 and out of the power rankings entirely. And then Pittsburgh, who was an honorable mention last week, had a really good week, so I bumped them to the 10th spot in the power rankings. So those were the only swaps I made. But just to recap, here's my top 10 power rankings for this week, for week 19 in the NHL. So at the 10th spot, we have Pittsburgh, 9 is Anaheim, 8 is Montreal, 7 is New York Islanders, 6 is Minnesota, 5 is Dallas, 4 is Tampa, 3 is Colorado, 2 is Carolina, and the number 1 team for the first time in what seems like forever, and first time since week 9 we don't have Tampa or Colorado as a top spot in the power rankings. We have the Buffalo Sabres. So definitely, let me know your thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? And if you disagree with me, who will be your top 10 of the power rankings on March 2nd? So definitely, let me know your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're late, remember to subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming in the very near future. If you can, leave a donation on my Buy Me a Coffee page, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. It really does help with the channel. I also do a blog to make news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so remember to check that out. I'll link to that in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.